Welcome back to Inside the Wellspace, where we take on life's hardest transitions with honesty and heart. Today, we're diving into how to do divorce with one of the sharpest minds in family law, Lois Liberman, co-chair of Blank Rome's New York office. She's been named to Law Dragon's 500 leading family lawyers, ranked by Chamber's high net worth, and featured everywhere from Good Morning America to The Today Show. She's a powerhouse advocate for high-profile clients. Lois brings decades of experience, compassion, and no-nonsense strategy to the table. Whether you're contemplating a split or navigating the aftermath, this episode is about clarity, empowerment, and moving forward on your own terms. Hi, Lois.
Hi, Cathy. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, welcome. And this intro doesn't do justice to the powerhouse of both empathy and skill that you are. I've known you for a number of years. Just to let everybody know, you helped me with my postnup agreement in the middle of a sort of a blindsiding, like, wow moment, and then an eventual divorce where we mediated, but I needed an attorney too. There's so much wonderful about you and, your understanding of nuance of situations and, need, around the whole idea that divorce is transactional. There's so much nuance to it all. So you're awesome. That's the bottom line. You're just amazing. So special. So we're here today to just talk to the girls out there who might be contemplating divorce, who aren't sure if it's the right thing, who might be getting forced into a divorce that they didn't expect, all these things that happen to us. Can I just ask you, so you're going to tell us all this stuff?
I'm going to hope to.
You are. So let's start it this way. When somebody comes in, what do you ask them? How does it start? What does this process start with?
Well, first, when they come in, I ask them like the pedigree information. What are their assets? What are the names of their children? How old are they? Where do they go to school? Some things about their expenses, things about whether or not they had a prenuptial agreement. Did they come into the marriage with monies? Did they inherit or get gifted? Or are they the beneficiary of a trust? I try to get some initial information, and then we just kind of dive into what's going on with them.
Yeah.
So that I can kind of understand what the impetus is for them to come in, whether or not they were coming in kicking and screaming, or whether or not it's something that they are just exploring to find out what their options are.
Yeah. Yeah, because sometimes it's not, I don't know, sometimes you just don't know what to do you?
Well, the reality is, which I always say, like, knowledge is power, right? So if you're contemplating or you're just, it's in the back of your mind, coming in to get a consultation does not mean you've crossed the Rubicon. You haven't made that decision yet, but you should educate yourself and get the information so that you can make good decisions. I think the worst thing for anybody is to make decisions in a knee-jerk way out of emotion. The best thing to do is really understand your rights and your remedies or your obligations, and to be able to make a decision from there.
Yeah. It's hard to do, isn't it, when you're in the middle of like an emotional state. I give you a lot of credit. I can't imagine what you take home with you at night. I mean, it's a lot, isn't it?
I think what makes me a good advocate is that I'm empathetic.
Yeah, I know. I love that about you. But you're also tough as nails.
No, for sure. But being empathetic does require you to really, get into the trenches and really, really understand and see it from your client's point of view, which sometimes can, be, you're mired in the toxicity of what they're dealing with.
Yeah.
But to be a good advocate is that you listen, you understand, you are empathetic to theirs, but you help guide them.
Right.
I am not a lawyer who's just going to tell you what you want to hear.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you the cold hard truth of what's going to happen. Right. I'm going to tell you what, the next steps are. But the point is that I'm going to help strategize to make sure that you are in the best place possible to go on to your next chapter. Because I would say in all my years, I know that I'm placing people in a better place than they were when they came in.
Thank God. I remember like one time, I'm trying to remember if it was during it was the postnup time. I remember I walked into your office at one point, like we were meeting with everybody, the other side, like my then husband and his lawyer, whatever. I walked in and you were like, oh, for God's sake, Cathy, you awful. I was like, well, it's pretty bad right now. It was so funny. Oh my God, you made me laugh so hard. It was true. No, it was so true. Wait, let's just back step for a minute
Yeah.
because I don't think I know this about you, but like, how did you get into this line of business?
It's funny because so many people are like, I could never do that. I would, kill myself before I did that. I mean, to a certain extent, I was a frustrated actress, so I knew I needed to be in court.
Wait,
right?
you were?
Totally was. I knew I wanted to be in court. And to be in court, you either were going to be like a DA, or a legal aid person.
Right.
And so initially, when I was interviewing around, all the legal aid offices like me, DAs did not. But I got this job and I interviewed with a woman who said, I think you'd be really great in our family court division. And I was like, oh, yeah. She's like, have you ever taken family law before?
Huh.
I said, I took a course. It was very interesting. And really, it was like being in the right time, right place.
Yeah.
It was kind of kismet because, quite frankly, I was really made to do this because I'm a fierce advocate. I love being in court. I love negotiating. I like to read a room. I love to be able to problem solve, but I want to do it for people.
Right.
I don't want
a reason.
A reason.
Yeah.
I was never going to be a transactional lawyer or be able to just do it on behalf of, a big XYZ company. For me, the fulfillment and the joy of it comes by making sure that I've gotten to know somebody and I've helped them.
Yeah.
So, there's a much longer story about how I went from legal aid to get into, being a matrimonial lawyer, a private family lawyer, and being now in one of the largest matrimonial practices within a large firm.
Yeah.
That's very unique. Most matrimonial lawyers are kind of in a boutique practice.
Right.
And we, as part of Blank Rome, have a bi-coastal large matrimonial practice within the umbrella of a large firm, which means that we have the ability for our clients, if they have a corporate matter, if they've got a tax matter, if they've got an estate matter, they've got some sort of employment issue within the divorce itself, we have all those practices under the same umbrella. And it's really helpful to a client. It's
very helpful to a client. And you're a big deal at this office too. I mean, you're not, you're like, you run don't you run the New York office?
I'm a coach of the New York office.
Yeah.
It's, I'm very honored that I get to do it. I've been with a firm for 33 years, which is,
aren't they smart? Aren't they smart?
And
I would say.
And I've watched our matrimonial group go from 5 people to, I think we're 35 people now. So the reality is I had a wonderful mentor. Get into it, in your podcast, having a wonderful mentor or having people who support you, no matter what you're doing, it helps launch somebody's, ability to perform the best that they can do. And for me, I was very lucky. And I feel that over the time I've, helped other young lawyers, also move forward. And that's why we have just an amazing group. We are a very close-knit community in our group, and we are very supportive of one another. And that also helps our clients because we have...
You can feel it, actually. When I was part of your world in that very, very delicate time, I felt very comfortable and supported.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was like a bubble almost.
And you know what? Because you have a lot of great minds to be able to problem solve together.
Yeah.
Sometimes, I think there's a danger sometimes with family lawyers. They kind of buy their clients, whatever the client is telling them, and they get kind of so entrenched and enmeshed with them.
Yeah.
They can't see the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
And we have a dynamic and robust group that we can kind of check each other in the sense of, okay, here's what I'm seeing, or this is what I'm dealing with in this problem. How would you handle it? And that helps our clients.
Right.
Because we're able to problem solve with a bunch of different, fabulous minds, not just our own.
Right. No, that's so helpful. And, I want to go just one thing you said before when you were talking about how you started and you said family law, like I wouldn't have even thought about it and it's kismet. But I really, I believe in that. I believe that, you're where you're supposed to be. And then all of a sudden, whoa, this cool thing happens. And you're like, well, wasn't this meant to be? Well, yeah, it was meant to. Of course it was meant to be because that's what it's supposed to be. And that's where you are. And then that's the path that you go on. And, you mentioned luck as well. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I feel like there's a little bit of luck and stuff, but okay, this is totally tangential, but sidebar, but I had lunch one day at Oprah Winfrey's house with Joe Malone.
Oh my God.
I know, it was the 3 of us.
Oh my God.
I It was
Did you
because
pinch yourself when you were
I
there?
did. I just listened a lot. She was asking Oprah, because Oprah really liked Joe Malone.
Yeah, yeah.
So she asked Joe, tell me your story, like what do you attribute like you're so successful, blah, blah.
Right.
And Joe said, oh, I've been so lucky, blah, blah, blah. And Oprah stopped her right there and said, there's no such thing as luck. Things happen when opportunity meets preparedness.
Oh, wow.
So clearly, like, you were ready for something and you got yourself into that environment because you knew that you needed a purpose, right? It needed to be purposeful. It couldn't be transactional for
No,
you.
for sure. And quite frankly, when then you say opportunity meets preparedness, when you have to be able to embrace it and
Yeah.
feel, when you are kind of met with somebody who has, knowledge to give and so much to teach,
Yeah.
to take advantage of that
Mhm.
and really go for it. I worry about younger people now because of after COVID, so many young professionals, even lawyers, they don't want to go into the office.
Mm.
They want to do everything remote. And you know what? You can't connect with people. You're not going to get the same type of mentorship. You're not going to learn the same way
Mhm.
without being, like you said, being in the room.
Gotta be in the room.
For all the opportunities that I was and I grabbed on them and
you did.
I, did whatever I could to make sure I squeezed everything
Yeah, you
out of
did.
those
Yeah.
opportunities.
Yeah. And that's why you're so great at what you do,
Mhm.
And okay, so you mentioned too, your office has grown so much over the years,
Right.
but so let's talk about the stats of divorce,
Yeah.
because I would imagine with the, great expansion, do you want to tell us all about, stats to ground us in what we're talking about to our lovely ladies who are, wondering what the heck they got themselves into?
No, sure. Look, I really, it's no surprise that like really 1 out of 2 marriages will end in or may have suffer some sort of crisis and will end in divorce.
Yep.
Stats have gone kind of up and down with respect to what kind of occurred because when we did have COVID, the courts had shut down,
Yeah.
people couldn't file. But once you had people who were like living within a bubble who normally had, you had 2 individuals. One was, going to work and had things after work. The other one took kids to the school and took them extracurricular activities. And they were like ships passing in the night. They were all in lockdown
Yeah.
for a very long time. The fissures of the relationship really turned into large crevices. So
Yeah.
when all of a sudden things opened up again, the stats were, I think, even higher to a certain extent because people couldn't wait to, get out from under whatever they were seeing. Sometimes they didn't recognize that they were in, a dysfunctional relationship,
Yeah.
or they didn't recognize that their spouse was really reliant on things to get by, like alcohol or cannabis or whatever it was, or that parenting styles were clashing in a tremendous way,
Yeah.
or they just really didn't like or know, didn't
Yeah.
find the person that they were really hunkered down with 24/7 to be the one that they wanted to stay with,
Yeah.
so to speak. So, I think that definitely was an impetus for a lot of stuff that we have seen. But that's over, and now we just go with the normal, stressors. We've talked about the cliche is like, it's a mother-in-law or it's money kind of situation,
Yeah.
but you also have stressors of people who are experiencing infertility. That
yeah.
is, and then going through multiple cycles of IVF or other procedures. And that's a huge stressor on a relationship and the money that goes into that.
Yeah.
So, very often if you have a sick child or there's somebody in the household that is not well, we are in a sandwich generation that we have
Mhm.
our kids and we have our parents who are either elderly or sick. Those stressors can, do a number on people's marriages.
It's a lot, isn't it?
There's a lot, but you know what? There's not one size fits all.
There's abuse too. You mentioned
I'm
abuse.
so
There's
sorry.
Addiction, abuse.
Yep.
Right? I mean, it's bad stuff.
No matter what, unfortunately, that abuse or coercive control, there's the physical abuse. There's no question you need to get out, right?
Yeah.
That's not even a question that you have to think about things.
Yeah.
Emotional abuse is a harder nut to crack sometimes because people, they become so used to it. They put they become almost, immune to what's going
Or
on.
not like knowing that what's actually happening.
Totally. And,
Yeah.
and not until, so New York has changed when it comes to grounds for divorce, in the sense of now we just have to say there's an irretrievable breakdown of the marriage for 6 months. Years ago, right, we had to do grounds, and you had to like write out a very large complaint to talk about cruel and inhuman treatment, like
Okay.
all these things. And we used to tell people who came in and said, like, I'm not really sure. Go talk to your parents, go talk to your friends, go talk to other people. And sometimes that door, when they opened up and they started saying, have you ever seen, this one incident that bothered me, but like, I don't really know if
Right.
there's other, and they would be like, what are you talking about? Don't you remember at Thanksgiving when he like threw the turkey and he so told everybody that you were a moron? Like,
Right.
don't you remember that? And people forget because you
Yeah.
become so, that's how you survive, right?
Right.
You have to put it in a box.
Yep.
So
That's real.
the reality is sometimes it takes talking to people to
Right.
really kind of get an understanding. And especially if you're a victim of coercive control, where you become isolated from your family, isolated from your friends, sometimes very, financially minimized, in the sense of that you have like only an allowance. All those things make you feel like you have no ability to get out.
Yeah.
So
Right. You feel stuck.
you feel stuck, and you
You
feel like
feel
there's no
stuck.
options out there. So
It's such a real feeling. Oh God, it's so real. I would imagine that people are resonating with that too, because I mean, in the world that I used to live in, people, women were on allowances.
yeah.
Like literally, did not have the access or control of the money, just because the guys made so much of it, and it was just like in their domain.
I tell women, and we'll do the usual, or the traditional. The husband went out to earn.
Yeah.
Wife is staying home with the kids, and they don't have the access to the bank accounts because they're all in the husband's name,
Yeah.
and they don't really. When I say, okay, tell me about your assets, tell me about your liabilities, tell me about your expenses, and they say, I truly don't know. First of all, if you commence a divorce action in New York, there is full and fair and liberal disclosure. So you'll get everything.
Okay.
But if you
Unless they're hiding it,
the
just
hi-
putting it out there.
no. Look,
Ah.
hiding, that can be a whole hour of discussion regarding hiding, but
Right.
usually if something emanates from a payment, right?
Right.
You can kind of find it in from, at least that if it came from an account,
Mhm.
and you have to follow the trail of money. But
Right.
hiding occurs,
Hiding
and
occurs.
there are forensic accountants that can do it. There are experts that can kind of figure out things. So I don't want anybody to feel like that there's no hope. But
Right.
when it comes to somebody who says, I truly don't know, I have told them to talk to their spouse and say, you go on business trips, you travel. God forbid you get hit by a bus or your plane
Yeah.
goes down. I have no idea where anything is.
Right.
Can you at least provide me with that information? Because you don't want the kids and me to have absolutely no idea. And very often that will sometimes at least, illuminate what the information that they're looking for,
That's
which
a
in a
great way to do it.
non-threatening way.
Non-threatening,
Right.
no confrontation, no idea of possible
Correct.
thinking around.
And it's logical, right?
It's logical.
Because,
Yes.
if all of a
Yes.
sudden they are hit by a bus and they have literally kept, why would they want to leave there?
Right.
But that, again, I totally understand, because very often in coercive controlling relationships,
control.
power and control,
Power and control.
the last
Yep.
thing they want to be able to do is allow somebody to have, the key to their jail, right? So
Oh my God, that's so true. Oh, the key to their jail cell. That's horrifying. Wait, can we just like a little anecdote about
yeah.
mother-in-laws?
No, sure.
Because I too had a mother-in-law, and the two things that stuck out at me when I was thinking about this is, for my birthday every year,
Yeah.
I got a black cashmere sweater from Bloomingdale's.
Same one?
No, but
Different,
but different. But literally every year, it got to a point where I hung them in my closet, all next to each other, as like a
Homage.
an homage. And then the other thing is, we would go on vacations, family vacations, and she would ask me to it would hand me the camera to take pictures,
Of her and the
and
rest of it.
and the boys and the
Yeah.
kids. Literally, Kathy, can you just take a picture of? I'm like, yeah, sure. I mean, yeah. So anyhow,
Yeah.
I understand.
No, look, in-law problems
Oh
is a
my
stressor,
God.
no matter how
Yes.
you slice it.
Yeah.
However, question is, does the family dynamic, is your spouse choosing you?
Right.
Is your spouse making you and your family a priority over his or her, family.
Family.
And
Exactly.
that is a fundamental bright line of you can't be second banana.
Not
I
at
mean,
all.
all of us think our children, our children are the moon and the stars, but your spouse better be, right.
Aligned.
Aligned or aligned in
Aligned.
that regard. But
First and foremost, that's what I say to my kids. When you get married, it is your family unit, period, 100%, and then
everybody
everything else.
Right.
And that has to come first. And if it doesn't,
That's a sign.
then we call you because there are going to be problems. There are going to be inherent problems with that dynamic. All right. So you talked about a little bit about what you ask people when they come in, the
Yeah.
marriage, the stuff, blah. You said something called identification of separate property.
Yeah.
It's just like what you're coming into the marriage with. You're inheriting something, you have a trust, blah, blah, blah.
There's a gift. There's the two buckets are marital property and separate property. Yeah. Marital property, the presumption is once you're married, everything that you acquire during the course of the marriage is marital.
Yeah.
However, there are other assets that are and can be deemed as your separate property. They either get a credit for if you have used it to purchase something or that it's just yours. Obviously, so we also do prenuptial agreements, right? We're talking about divorce. The best way to have clarity in a divorce is if you had a prenuptial agreement.
Mm-hmm.
That was the roadmap for, God forbid, death or divorce.
Right.
If you don't have that, things you came into the marriage with, if you still have those accounts, if you have your same bat mitzvah account with your same 10 shares of Apple that you got when you were 13,
Right.
and then they split multiple times
Yeah.
or whatever over the years, if you never touch that account, that's your separate property.
Right.
Gifts from parents or grandparents or family members, unless that gift was to both of you and your spouse,
Right.
should be your separate property.
Right.
Inheritances, trust distributions, and certain types of awards for personal injury awards.
Gotcha. Yeah. That makes
Right?
sense, actually.
So that's a
Yeah.
part. The problem is very often is that people in a marriage don't think about, I'm going to keep that in an account and leave
No.
it there.
Yeah.
I'm going to commingle. I'm
Right.
going to use it. Or especially in a type of kind of controlling relationship or coercive control, if the spouse, the wife has a little bit of money, all of a sudden the husband, he's having some liquidity problems or taxes are due or something, can you just
Yeah.
you've got the cash, we don't.
Let's use that.
Let's use that.
Let's
and
use
then all of a
that.
sudden your safety net out the window.
Bye-bye. Yeah. That's tough, man.
No. I've seen,
Ugh.
mostly seen it all. But look, people come to see me. I first want to make sure that they are ready for the next step. I've been around for a long time. I'm going to be around for some more. I never say to anybody, you got to make a decision now.
No.
Unless somebody comes in. And as I've gotten older, I'm a little bit more blunt. I really do believe somebody is in an abusive relationship, I will call it out.
Yeah, of course.
Because I no longer, tiptoe around that.
Good for you. Well, you're also in a position where you can say it with authority
Yeah.
because you've seen so much of it. So it's not emotional.
Right.
It's just you saying, look, this is what this is.
Even sometimes you'll have a consultation and I'll say, look, this is what I think is going to end up happening. And then they'll call me back 6 months and say, oh my God, everything you said was going to happen. And it's
Right.
how did you know? And it's not like I'm not prescient. It's just, people kind of fall into buckets to
Yeah.
a certain extent. Their
Yeah.
patterns of behavior.
Right.
And I've seen so much of it, I can kind of predict.
Right.
No matter what, divorce is not for sissies.
No.
And if you're the one that's making that decision, you need to really know all the things that are going to be coming down the pike before you make that decision. If you're the one got blindsided and it wasn't your choice, I'm going to help you become more comfortable with the situation.
Mhm.
And that it's not all bad. I tell people to a certain extent, it's not unusual that that people are like onions. They have
Mhm.
multiple layers.
Yeah.
And the onion that you married, because over time layers wear away, crises cause different layers to dissect. And sometimes you're not married to the same onion you were married to.
Or
in the
maybe
beginning.
you didn't know the onion.
And you didn't know it maybe.
And the onion peeled and you were like, what the heck is that onion?
Right, exactly.
That's not what I cooked.
That was not what I bargained for.
Yeah.
So I have one now, just to the extent that I tell her all the time, he did you a favor.
Yeah.
Because you probably wouldn't have gone.
Yeah.
And now you're going to be the mistress of your own financial domain.
Oh, thank God.
You no longer have to be a babysitter.
No.
He's not going to be your third child anymore, right? All
Yeah.
those things.
Right.
He really gave you an out. And so it's not, and to embrace that, so to speak.
Well, I think that's a great point, actually. And, I have a couple of friends right now
Right.
who are around my age who are not in happy relationships, nor have they ever really been.
Yep.
And what they say to me is, I need an out.
Yeah.
There needs to be an occurrence, and
Right.
the
Something
occurrence.
some like bomb that has
Correct.
to erupt, or
Something
some
that
major
enables
issue.
you to leave, because it's hard to leave. It's not easy to leave. It's not.
You're absolutely right. But sometimes, you know what? Look, life is short.
Yes, it is.
You've been through,
I know.
A major life-altering event,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
You can't keep waiting for, something's going to happen to let me out. Like
No. You have to make a choice.
you have to make a choice.
You have
And
to make a
look,
choice.
again, people shouldn't make that decision lightly.
No.
But if there's a possibility that you could have a life that you want,
Yeah.
and you want to write your own chapter, why
Sounds
continue to be stuck? Look, there are plenty of people also who they like their lifestyle, they like the trappings, and therefore they will turn a blind eye to whatever bad behavior is going on and on the other side. But I think they're losing, like, pieces of them are like dying. Right? And I
Yes.
just,
Totally.
that's, I don't think the greatest way to live.
No.
And I don't know that it's the greatest model to show your children about what is you should tolerate and what's acceptable, so to speak, also.
I totally agree with you. And my kids appreciate our life choice, because it was the right choice.
Right.
That gives me great, comfort and solace to know that they recognize that it was the right choice.
On that vein, right? A
Yeah.
lot of people say, like, when my kids are out of the house,
Yeah.
or when they graduate college,
Yeah.
or when they get married, there's some sort of milestone that's going to be that
Right.
they're out, so
Right.
to speak, right?
Right.
And all I can say is that older children actually fare poorer
Really.
in divorce
Really?
than younger children,
Why is that?
because they think their life to a certain extent it must have been a sham.
Oh,
All of this was not, it must not have been the happy family that I thought. I mean, it's an interesting, dichotomy in the sense of, you think that they're going to be more prepared, they're more mature, they're more able to deal with, whatever comes their way. And interestingly enough, that's not really true.
No.
So, I think.
Huh. That's fascinating. I think that's a stimulus.
Right.
Right. For people, to your point, who are thinking about it right now, knowing that it's not going in a good direction, knowing, that things are happening or whatever's going on. No, it's tough to make the right choice.
Absolutely. But, look, like I said, when people come in to see me, I really want them to weigh their options and to also make sure that this is the right path for them.
Yeah.
And nobody should nobody should come to me and make a decision because they had a fight the night before.
No, yeah.
If it's the 12th fight about the same thing,
Right.
or,
Right.
The fight, what turned physical, or things that were done and said were just so horrible, and it was in front of the kids, and it happens all the time.
Yeah.
Because as we've talked about in the past, right, certain types of, emotional abuse and certain types of behavior can be as injurious to kids as if you were hitting them.
Absolutely, 100%. When they see it and absorb it, it is as if they are getting abused as well. 100%.
So
that's real. My mind is going in like so many different places because I want to go there and I want to go there. And so, okay, so what we're saying though, just to say, because divorce is not for sissies, that it's really important to take care of yourself during this process, right? Like, you have to be rested and strong.
Before, during, after, right?
Right.
You need to put yourself, if you're the one that's about to embark upon this, right?
Right.
You need to take whatever steps is necessary to pretty much gird your loins, fortify yourself.
Yeah.
Provide yourself with to make sure that you're in the best possible state to deal with all the crap that's going to come your way,
Right.
so to speak.
Right.
That includes, and that's for the during the process as well. You need to find good and supportive friends and family, not the ones who are going to criticize you or say, this is a terrible decision. You need to find those who are really going to be there for you.
He's such a good guy. Why would you do that?
Right. Or, it's going to be so hard.
What about the kids? Uh-huh. Yeah.
You need
Later
to
for them.
block out
Later
those
for them.
people.
Yep.
You'll find, that one sad thing that happens very often in people who are experiencing divorce, all of a sudden the friends that they thought they had, they're not around.
That happened to me.
Because they think divorce is catchy.
My doctor said this to me.
Yeah.
My doctor said it to me, who's Holly, who you saw.
Yeah.
She was on it. She's the best. She was like, prepare yourself, because not my old close friends who don't live in our community. Those are my rocks who I'm still friends with. I mean, and that's fine. But the ones who were in my community, who I really did think were my friends.
Sure, you were. You went to pick up and drop
All of
off,
it.
and they were
Social,
carpool and
this, that.
social. Right.
No, Holly was like, FYI, heads up. And I was like, not going to happen. No way is that going to happen. Let me tell you, absolutely 100% happened.
Totally. Like that
with
whole,
all of them.
Oh, all of them. You know what? Look.
Awful. Yeah.
It does. It's jarring, right?
It's jarring.
Hurtful.
It was hurtful, especially when you're down.
Totally.
Yeah.
But, they were never going to be good friends anyhow. And quite frankly, those who really go running.
Yeah.
Because it's very often because they're worried about their relationship in some way, like that somehow this is catchy or whatever, or they're insecure. They're not the rock. You need a good therapist, no matter how
always
you slice it.
Yep.
I'm an extremely empathetic advocate, but I'm way too expensive on an hourly rate to be your therapist.
You're not
right?
a therapist.
I'm not a therapist. I mean, like I say, I play one on TV. I'm really good at it.
You are
but
good.
The reality is you need somebody, a therapist to help. There are other individuals out there like divorce court coaches and stuff like that who can actually help. And having a good financial advisor, depending, where you are in the process to help make decisions with you. Like, again, the marital home is something that so often becomes like the holy grail when it really shouldn't be a holy grail kind of thing. For sure, nobody's looking to rip kids out of their home, so to speak. But if that home is full of debt or the monthly expenses are just way, too much, or it is really just going to be a money pit type of thing, that is, you don't just hold on to it just because it's your home kind of thing. But those kinds of things, if you have a good financial advisor, can really help you
talk sense into you.
Or just give you all the, the realities versus, it's just because I need to, I want to. So
Yeah. Good lawyer, of course.
So finding a lawyer, look, first of all, you never want to, if you're about to embark upon this process, do not go to a generalist. There are a lot of people who feel like they can do it. They are your, the guy who did your closing, who also does divorce. You need a specialist because there are, statutory things, case law driven. Also, you need to know the nuances and you need to know the players in the sense of I work in a kind of in a high net worth milieu, and it's like the same lawyers you see over and over again. You kind of also want to know what's going to happen on the other side, and kind of like what they're about to do. It's good to have somebody who has knowledge and experience. You also need to have somebody who's aligned with what you want to do.
Yeah.
You just can't. It's not necessarily the best thing to always just hire the bomb thrower or the person who's going to make things the most litigious just because you're pissed. Ultimately, at the end of the day, that might not have been your best, strategy, so to speak. It's really important, in my opinion, to actually have consultations with a couple of lawyers to really feel like who you feel like you can work with, because you are dealing with the most personal and the most intimate, situation, next to a doctor, right? A lawyer who's dealing with your divorce has to deal with so many different issues. You're dealing with not just dividing your money and figuring out what your support receipt or obligations are going to be. It's dealing with your kids, right? The most precious probably asset that you have potentially, and how you're going to deal with custodial and parental access issues going forward.
Yeah. I met you when my world started rocking through my financial advisor.
I didn't remember.
Yeah, Aaron.
Yeah.
And I was
Oh,
having,
right, Aaron.
yeah, I was, it was a crazy time for me. And I realized I needed a post-nup, like stat. Aaron said, "Oh, Kathy," cause he was helping me
Yeah,
with
sure. With
just,
your
making sure everything was like, protected, blah, blah. And he was like, "Oh no, you need to call Lois right now." I was like, "Who's Lois?" And he said that you were on the opposite side
yeah.
of him in a divorce situation, and that you were just like the best person in the room. So
That is probably the most amazing referral source when you get you get a referral from like the other side,
yeah, yeah,
either
yeah,
the
yeah,
other litigant or the
yeah,
other, financial advisor or
yeah.
some expert. That's, the greatest compliment in the world.
He was a mensch. He was like really helping me and making
Yeah, he
making
was
sure I was good and okay. And I mean, like, I'd be in his office like shaking, and he was like, "No, no, no, we got you. We're gonna, we're calling Lois." So it was really great. And so that is really super important. And when you talk about the money, you mentioned that what happens to some women is you get locked out of the cash.
Yeah.
So, you find that you don't necessarily have money to put down for your lawyer.
Right.
What do you suggest? What do you do?
Well, first of all, there's always, lawyers take credit cards. So
Okay,
there's
good.
there's you have that ability. I mean,
Great.
sometimes, all of a sudden you pay that retainer and then all of a sudden your credit card,
Doesn't work anymore.
doesn't work anymore or whatever.
Right.
But, some lawyers who, if they know that there's assets there, they'll take on the case and then they'll file immediately for something called pendente lite support and or counsel fee award.
Okay.
Or else, you look to borrow from somebody because we're going to immediately get you
Yep.
back that money. But you never should feel like, okay, there's just no option, right?
Right.
I have no option.
Right.
There's always
There's
if
always an option.
there's a will, there's a way.
Right. And you've got to get the good lawyer. Like, you have to have the good lawyer. It's most important. Yeah. Yep.
Look, they're in divorce situations, some very often, especially when the litigant is perhaps a victim of some type of like coercive control, and then they are finally out from under the thumb of their spouse, and now they're having difficulty modulating their voice and figuring things out. Sometimes, they often will, when your frustrations that you're experiencing against your spouse, you can't do anything about it. Sometimes you take it on the next best person, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a lawyer. So
Yeah.
it's not unheard of that lawyers, come and go during a divorce process
Yeah.
because, they feel like that's the only control they have over their life. And they're
Yeah.
like, okay, I'm firing you. I'm hiring
Yeah,
somebody
yeah.
else. So, that happens sometimes in these situations, but there's always somebody that is going to be aligned with your,
Mm.
your goals, if they're realistic
Right.
and they are appropriate. You just, there are lawyers out there who'll just tell their client whatever they want to hear. And I
Right.
just, I always caution people about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, having a good lawyer, having a good therapist, having a good support network, all those things I think are critical.
Really important. Sleep. You got to sleep. Eat well. Hydrate.
Hydrate, all
Like,
those-
literally, like you're running a marathon.
But
Like,
that's to a
take
certain extent.
care,
Absolutely.
because it is a marathon.
It
and it
is.
is exhausting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's no joke, right?
No joke.
Because,
No joke.
but at the same token, right, it's going to be, there's no quick fix.
No. No.
Divorce doesn't happen overnight unless something we've talked about in the fact there's mediation.
Oh, yeah.
talk
I was
about
going to ask
mediation.
about that. What do you
Because
think
you
about
talked about
mediation?
you
Yeah, yeah,
did
yeah.
mediation. Okay,
That's
so
right. Yeah.
mediation, I'm a big believer in mediation, but for the right types of cases and the right types of people.
Right.
If a husband says to a wife, let's just go to a mediator, we can get it done within 2 seconds. It's no big deal kind of thing. But the wife has no idea where their assets are or
Right.
what any of the information is. A mediator only wants someone to get to yes, right? So that's not an even playing field.
Mm-mm.
So if you can go to a mediator, but both parties should have a lawyer, whether it be in the background advising them or in the foreground participating in the mediation
Yeah.
with them. Dynamics where one person says jump and the other person says how high, that's not a good dynamic for mediation.
Mm-mm.
We're experiencing in the New York court system at the moment, some backlog, some new judges and things that we just aren't able to kind of predict. Very often we will recommend to our clients to utilize mediators who are like retired matrimonial judges or practitioners who've been doing it for, gazillion years, if you have a litigant on the other side and a lawyer on the other side who's reasonable, it is a process that can be utilized with, you hire the mediator and everybody can get it done in a shorter time frame and in a relatively less painful way and sometimes less expensive way. But if you have a combination of a litigant who just refuses to compromise, somebody who may be a narcissist, a raving, narcissist, or a lawyer on the other side who's just looking to churn the case, you're not going to be able to do mediation. And that's when you have to go in front of a judge.
Oh, gosh, yeah. I hate to sit and make that noise because that's part of it. It's part of it. It's part of it. You gotta do what you gotta do, right? I mean, ultimately, what you said too is it's really it's a business transaction,
Yep.
right? I mean, yeah.
Well, look, I mean, splitting up your kids and figuring out the parental access, that's not just a business transaction, but you have to really think about it of what's in the best interest of the children and being able to have access to both parents, notwithstanding how one of your appendages is being ripped from under you, right? If your kids live with you 24/7 and now they're not going to be with you on Tuesday overnights and alternate weekends and certain holidays and vacations, that's feeling like you're an organ was just removed, right?
That was like the worst part of it for me. The hardest and worst part of it for me. One of my girlfriends, literally the first night that I was up by myself in my house,
Right.
she stayed with me on the phone till I fell asleep.
Yeah.
Literally, we cooked dinner together. We had dinner together. We hung out, and then it was time for bed.
Yeah. No, look, these are the hard milestones, but in the end, all of a sudden now you have reclaimed certain times where you can focus on yourself, right? Without the distraction or just understanding that those are going to be times that you get to see friends.
Right.
You get to do things that are for you. You get to take a vacation
Right.
by your, with your friends or with your family or what have you. But look, none of this is easy. But from the standpoint of making financial decisions, that is a business transaction versus doing it out of emotion, that's super important too.
Right.
And so having a good lawyer and having a good financial advisor also at times.
Right. To help weigh in on that stuff too. And then the one thing that you said too, which I think is really important that we mention, is a trust and estates lawyer because of your will and the deceased spouse clause. Can you explain those two things? Because I think that's really important to know about. I did not know about any of that. I got lucky, I guess, because everyone's alive. But
Okay, so first, when you're in the midst of when you're in, at least I can tell you in New York, right? Even if you leave $1 in your dirty laundry to your spouse, in the will, if you predecease them, they're entitled to 1/3 of your estate.
Of the entire estate.
Of the entire estate.
Even if it wasn't allocated that way in your will.
Correct. Because unless you have a prenup that waived their right of election, they're entitled to 1/3 of your estate.
Okay.
Now, remember, if you own things jointly, like a home, if you pass away, it goes to the other.
100%.
Right? 100% to them. And if you have a joint account,
100% to them.
Goes to them. But the stuff that's just in your name, or you thought it was great Aunt Sadie's, gave you the 10 shares of Apple that turned into 1,000 shares of Apple or whatever, that's in your name and in your own brokerage account, they're entitled to 1/3 of that.
Wow. Okay.
So that's called a right of election. So first, very often spouses, they do what's called pour over wills. Like, I leave you everything, you leave me everything, and you're in the middle of a divorce. Sometimes people don't fix their wills.
Right.
So first of all, first thing we tell people is you need to fix your will to ensure that they get no more than their marital third or right of election. So that's number one. So it's not a pour over, like, God forbid you get hit by a bus. They get everything, because also if you're in the middle of a divorce and God forbid you get hit by a bus, the divorce abates and then they get
everything.
They're the spouse and they get their right of election, or they get their, if they own the home together or the joint account, they get all that stuff. So that. Two, there is a crazy situation that if you don't identify in your will where you want to be buried or what you want, where your remains should go, or how you want your funeral to occur, if you're in the middle of a divorce and the divorce is now abated, your spouse gets to make those decisions. And so
Throw
even
you
though,
right in the East River. Out you go.
or they'll put you in the family plot with them, right? Where you have no desire to
No.
be with their,
With the mother-in-law
Yeah,
who
yeah.
gave you black sweaters.
correct, exactly. So that's, super important. If after the divorce, right, you now have all your chits and you're now preparing for your next chapter, you have to, have prepare your will, do all the things that are necessary, because the worst thing is that you didn't change your life insurance policy that said the beneficiary is your spouse,
Right.
or it's or the trust that they're still the trustee or the beneficiary.
Right.
Usually we try to put all that in the agreement
Mhm.
itself, the separation agreement or stipulation of settlement, but sometimes people forget or they don't follow through, and then that can,
And if they're not involved in the money,
yeah.
if they're not on top of the assets, they wouldn't think about any of that stuff.
Look, a good lawyer is going to send you a checklist at the end of
Okay,
your
good.
divorce and say, here's the things you need to still do.
Right, right.
People always do it, not always, but that's definitely, but a good trust and estates lawyer should be part of your team.
Your team.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you
for
need
sure.
that team. Wow, it's good. This is so good. Like, this is so great. I hope everyone's taking notes out there because this is practical stuff. And, the thing about divorce is obviously it's so emotional and you're like in the worst possible emotional, physical space that, to have this kind of clarity and also like to feel assuaged that it's all going to be okay.
For sure.
Like it's going to be okay if I have this great team and I can do this. I can find it,
Absolutely.
Like you're crawling out from under a rock, but you can do it.
Look, I started, also because I saw, and you helped me with this, actually. I don't know if you remember,
What did I do?
because I went out to lunch with you and Jean.
Yeah.
And it was after we had a lunch. There was a bunch of like current clients or former clients, and some of them knew each other, but they all started talking about, issues, things that
Right.
happened. And I said, you think you guys would be interested, or you think if I brought in resources or experts or things to help you through, or even just being
Yeah.
part of a community of knowing this one went through it and they survived and thrived afterwards, just knowing there's somebody else to kind of lean on and be part of a community. And you guys helped me create, I do these look ahead with Lois Liberman salons where,
I love them.
we did one with coercive control, and I've done ones of like co-parenting with a narcissist.
Yep.
How do you get back out into the dating world?
Yes.
Being a mistress of your own financial domain.
I
what
love
to
that
do.
phrase.
Right.
That's a great phrase, mistress of your own financial domain.
Making sure that clients have these kinds of resources. Also, knowing you're not alone, I think,
Yes.
is super important.
Yep. We feel alone, I think, the girls. We often do feel alone because we carry heavy burdens.
Right.
We carry heavy emotional burdens because we are raising the children and we're in relationships, and oftentimes we are not in control at all of in our relationships financially. We deal with all sorts of abuses. Many of us are working, and it's like exhausting.
No.
And who you can't with your girlfriends talk about this kind of stuff. I mean, it's too much. It's too heavy. So when you're in the middle of these big emotional devastations that are uprooting a foundation that you thought you had, having a community like the one you've created is so valuable.
Totally. And like, when you talked about working women, right? And who
Yes.
are very often, they are still the ones who are responsible for getting the groceries,
Yeah.
making sure dinner's on the table, and getting kids to the doctor's appointment. And their spouse may or may not have been very involved. It is maddening to them that all of a sudden the divorce has occurred and now they want to be super dad.
Oh, yeah.
They want to be involved in every decision. They want to ensure that they have some sort of input, and they want to have all sorts of access, where before all the mom wanted to do was beg the other side, can you take that day off to do?
Yeah.
Right. And it's maddening,
Oh, yeah.
but unfortunately, they can all of a sudden turn a new leaf, and the courts will say, yeah, they're entitled to have the access. But
Because that's just fact.
that's just a fact.
That's the fact, is if they want it, they have it because they're the parent.
And that's the point, because most mental health, there are lots of different mental health professionals who will, I talk about, what's what's in the best interest of the kids and what's best for this aged child or what have you. But the first and foremost, every child psychologist or who's in this field are going to say children fare better with having two parents
Yeah.
who are involved and interested and want to spend time with them and are involved in their life. So
Right.
what that means in the sense of like what days, what nights, what is going to be the calculation. We do it out of like matrimonial practitioners talk about how many days out of 14. We're like, is it a 5 out of 14 schedule? Is it a 6 out of 14 schedule? Is it a 50-57 out of 14? But point being is that what the mental health professionals will say is if the two parents are warring and they are hating each other
Right.
and talk horribly about each other
It's awful.
all day long, it doesn't matter what schedule that you are going to exercise, they're going to have irreparable harm, so to speak.
Yeah.
That also is kind of like a maddening situation in the sense of like your spouse is saying bad things about
Yeah.
you.
Ugh.
You want to, and I brought a book for you to
Thank
talk
you.
about. I brought you
No.
that's great. I had Wendy Baharian, who was with Disarming the Narcissist. The point being is that you don't double down. And as
No,
your
you
spouse is
can't.
talking about that, mom broke up the family, or mom, don't have any money because mom
Mhm.
took it all, or mom, didn't let me have you the other night, even though I really wanted you.
Yeah.
When your child comes home and talks about what dad said, don't say, oh, that mother bleeper,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
what a doggone. Just say as, oh, that must have made you feel terrible,
Really uncomfortable.
really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that happened.
Yeah. Yep.
Parents, we have different, well, I'll talk to dad about that, but this has nothing to do with you. So
It's so hard, Lois.
oh my God.
It's really hard because it's asking a lot. First of all, I'm not a fan of toxicity at all.
Yeah.
Like I'm an avoider of toxicity because I feel like it breeds worse feelings. So that wouldn't be my go-to.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is it's hard to be the bigger person.
Totally.
It's hard to always be the bigger person, especially when you feel so bad. Especially when you're mourning a loss. You're mourning, even though I remember when I went and signed my divorce papers, even though it was the right decision, hands down. I mean, it wasn't even like a question. It was the right move on every level. I cried because I thought it was sad. It was sad to me that it just didn't work out. For so many reasons, it didn't work out. And it just kind of broke my heart.
So I learned that as a very, very young lawyer. I was part of helping the partner in this really contentious divorce. And our client, it was like a pilot. It left, this wife of gazillion years, for the stewardess, whatever. And I did not understand, like at the divorce, right?
Yeah.
We finished it. The wife was on the stand. She hated this man. Like
Yeah.
she could have,
Yeah.
done a Lorena Bobbitt. She would have. And she was bawling on, and this is a long time ago. You had to like testify in order to get the divorce. You had to say either, we hadn't slept together for a year, we've been separated, or you had to go through certain things, terrible things that had happened. And she was crying. And I remember saying to my partner at the time, like, I don't understand. She hates him. Shouldn't she be so happy?
Yeah.
And I learned it's because everyone's grieving the loss of a family. Of what you thought was going to be your future.
It was going to be what you tried so hard to make it be. And, especially when you're in a situation that's not working and it, but you're trying so hard to make it work. I'm speaking to a lot of people out there who are listening right now because, it's like I said before, we carry a lot of weight, girls, we do. The idea of keeping a family intact, even if you're in a horrific situation, which you've seen, you think about your kids, you think about all that, and then you mourn the loss of that idea, but also not being with your kids all the time.
Totally. And I'm
hard.
Now, I warn clients, when we've had that wonderful day that we've signed the agreement and they're, relieved, I always warn them, no matter what the relationship was, that you give yourself the time to grieve because it's going to hit you. Even if you don't think.
Go too.
Totally.
It'll come and go. It's not like a straight line at all the grieving process.
For sure.
Yeah, it's not, because it hits you as you go along too.
Absolutely.
And as you grow and as you evolve and become happier and stronger once you get out of a bad situation. There's one thing I think well, there are many things we have to continue talking about, but there's one thing that you said that I thought was really important, which is about having rights,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that's something that we can tend to forget too, as a woman in these circumstances, that we don't necessarily, we might not have the rights that we think we do.
Well, okay, so even though we're like in 2025, I have heard and still seen if the husband's a wage earner and the wife has stayed home
Yep.
with the kids, that the husband will talk about that it's my income, it's my accounts, they're my assets, and that's not true. Marital property is acquired during the course of the marriage, notwithstanding how title is held. So even if your husband has retirement assets, has carried interest and deferred compensation and RSUs, and they're all in his name, they're marital property.
Okay.
So that's why when we started out, I said, knowledge is power.
Yep.
Getting a consultation to understand what your rights are is super important. But every spouse has rights. So rights to assets, rights to support, rights to custody.
That's right. And you said there are 3 buckets of money,
Mm-hmm.
which is the maintenance, the child support, and equitable distribution of assets.
Yeah.
Right? So those are the 3 money buckets that the girls need to
Know their rights about and try to understand.
and understand that feelings of intimidation and powerlessness might be there throughout it all. And you got to pretend that they're not there, and like be tough.
No. Look, it's just really, especially if you're in a relationship where you just don't have the access and you don't have, the ability to identify, like, I know our house is worth this much and I think our mortgage is worth this much. And I know that our monthly nut is this. This is how much we pay for private school. And last year's tax return said blank, right? Because so often, all of a sudden somebody will bring you the tax return and say, oh, it's due today. Just sign it. I mean, now we have DocuSign. And so usually it's like on the email and you have to give them the accountant authority, but it's not uncommon where the husband just like signed the wife's name or even like did the thing on the computer, right? Never showed them, so to speak.
Oh, I had my name signed for
Yeah.
many times. Yeah.
But, you have a right when you file joint returns to call your accountant and say, I need a copy of it, right?
Yeah.
You have a right to get it from the IRS. I mean,
Mhm.
there are tons of rights out there. The only thing I will say, just because I recently had a consultation and the woman was telling me that her husband was dictating things, telling her about what was going to happen, and he was relying on ChatGPT. Don't rely on ChatGPT for it to tell you about your rights, but
Wait, that's hysterical.
I swear to God.
That is hysterical.
Inquiring and figuring out what rights you have.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
as we talked about, there are the equitable distribution is the division of marital property.
Mhm.
And identifying if there's separate property, if there's not, but just going through the motion. And really in New York, if we're pretty much, if you have a liquid or liquidatable assets and property, unless you have a prenuptial agreement, it's probably going to be divided 50-50.
Mhm.
There are certain things that are not automatically divided 50-50, which are business interests, which get valued. So also people should understand that if your husband has an interest in, XYZ Widget Corporation, and he's a 45% owner of that with his uncle and his brother or whatever, not just their family business, so to speak. You have a right to get his interest valued, and then you're going to get bought
50%
out.
of that.
Well,
whatever.
Business interests are not necessarily 50%. You have to talk about contribution, and depending on its length of marriage, what did you do to help? Raising the kids is good enough, but there are varying degrees of how much. It's not an automatic 50-50. Just because it's in that other person's name, what will end up happening is that you'll be bought out of that, your interest, your rights. And that means the rest of the estate will be divided. You'll have a larger piece of it because they're just keeping the business. So they'll, be very unhappy because
Mhm.
it's not like something that they have a ability to sell, so to speak. Or if somebody, has a partnership interest at a law firm or an accounting firm or even a medical practice,
Mhm.
the wife's going to have an interest, has an ability to get a piece of that.
Got it. That makes sense. I think that sounds great. That's good to know. You got to know these things. Something that we talked about before too was just as part of the writing it into a divorce is something about around
Parenting coordinators.
yes,
Hmm.
right, which I had and was like a lifesaver, game changer, an absolute necessity.
Okay, so let's first start with the idea of when people throw around the word custody,
Yeah.
right? So there's something called legal custody, that's decision making.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's physical custody, is what's going to be the parental access schedule. Are the children going to primarily live with mom, let's just say, and what's the parental access schedule that dad's going to have, so to speak. So whether or not you are dealing with a spouse or a co-parent that you've always been aligned with and they always let you do whatever they did. If you have a joint legal custody with them, that means the two of you have to make you have to mutually agree upon important things like education,
Hmm.
medical decisions, extracurriculars, sometimes, religious issues, right? Most judges are going to require some type of mechanism within the agreement because they don't want you to keep coming back to court every time there's a fight.
Right.
So they very often recommend a parenting coordinator. And we, for over the years, these individuals, either they're mental health professionals,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes child psychologists or couples, sometimes they're lawyers who have or experienced matrimonial lawyers or that they've always dealt with kids, that they were attorneys for children. They sometimes play these roles.
Got it.
And these individuals will help parties make decisions. And sometimes they're given the authority to be like the tiebreaker. They'll
Oh,
pick mom or dad's side.
I think we did that.
Yeah, yeah, that's it.
I
That's
think we
the
did that.
best way
Yeah.
because there will never be inertia forever,
Right.
which can be, maddening when one parent wants to, let's assume the child has got ADHD and they want to give the child medication because that's been what has been recommended. And the other parent's like, nope, nope,
Yep.
nope, not going to do it. Nope, not
Yeah.
my kid. It's all because to your household, you just don't have rules and regulate, whatever it may
Right. Right.
be.
Right.
Parenting coordinator will talk to the parties, sometimes talk to the doctor,
Yep.
figure out, and they'll say, okay, I'm choose mom or dad's side.
Right.
And
Right.
so
Right.
they can't come up with a third option. They're
Right.
not given like you make the decision for my
Right.
child, but they can come up with a potentially compromise that both of you can buy into.
Right.
But if it comes down to the log jam, they get to pick mom or dad's side, and then
Got it.
everybody's got to follow it.
Genius.
Especially if you're dealing with somebody who's like a true narcissist or just a douchebag, right? That they're just gonna because you said the sky was blue today, they're gonna say the sky was, yellow, whatever.
Mhm.
You need to have somebody else to kind of because so often when you're dealing with a parenting coordinator, you said this is what I think our child needs or whatever. Your spouse didn't hear you, said no way, and then you got to the parenting coordinator and they're like, sure, of course, because the parenting coordinator said it.
Right. Right. It's so funny,
So
isn't it?
yeah, no, but
As whatever works is the
whatever.
bottom line. Whatever works, whatever gets the kids what they need,
Yep,
whatever keeps things moving and flowing in the positive direction, that's the answer,
absolutely.
right?
But
That's the answer.
but as you said, these parenting coordinators can be like lifesavers.
It was a game changer it was totally a game changer. Let's touch a little bit more deeply on the whole concept of toxicity and
Yep,
coercive control, because you've seen a lot of this stuff. Can you just synthesize it so perhaps people who are listening who don't know the words
yep.
might say, "Oh yeah, that is absolutely familiar to me."
So it's when one partner it becomes the dominant force and basically isolates the other,
Mhm.
both from family, from friends, very often exerts financial control to the extent where they really don't have access to cash and to resources. You'll find emotional degradation, like you'll just be degraded all the time and really kind of puts you in really like you feel like you're under somebody's thumb. Sometimes it becomes so natural. Like
Mhm.
you're not seeing it, you don't understand the signs, but all of a sudden, and there will be threats, right? If you don't do
Like
X,
passive threats. Yeah,
I'm going
yeah,
to do
yeah.
that. I mean, one that's just very highlighted in for one client, they were not married, and the father of the children said, if you don't give me this schedule, I'm going to go to court and ask for 50%. I don't even want it, but I'll just ask for it if you don't give me X and Y. So, that threat, was just too much for her to bear. But coercive control, something that is, especially when you're dealing with financial abuse,
Yeah.
when people don't have access or they were just all of a sudden they didn't like what you did or you talked back.
Right.
All of a sudden your credit card got turned off.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you didn't.
You were a bad girl.
You're a bad girl.
You're a bad girl and you're getting punished.
Yep.
And it happens over and over again, and you don't know why, but you know that you did something wrong.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then, very often the victim does everything possible. It's like they're walking on eggshells.
Yeah.
They're, doing anything and everything to please the other person.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, usually that's, they're
Not possible.
not
right?
possible. Right.
It's just not possible. It's not possible. It's the situation, and it's really it's tricky to get out of. It's tricky to identify,
Right.
to
Totally.
put a label on it. But now that we're talking about it, people can Google
Yep.
and then see words that come up that might look and sound familiar to them, which
Yep.
might help them understand their own situations. So that's a good thing. But there's certain things you can do to you suggest to people to help them extricate themselves.
Well, so whether or not you're in a coercive controlling relationship, or whether or not you really are somebody who is in a situation where you are being emotionally abused or physically abused, right? So physical abuse, you can go get an order of protection from family court without having to hire a lawyer. That you
Okay.
can go in by yourself.
You can do that.
You can do that. And
Wow.
literally there will be people in the probation, they call it the probation department or the petition department, and you just need to tell them what happened.
Yeah.
You can also, without even having to go do that, you can call the police. I mean,
Yeah.
so often people will say, I was thought my kids would be scared.
Yeah.
But like, as we've talked about,
Yeah.
just the being subjected to these fights, these situations where, you're cowering and somebody is punching walls and maybe not be punching you, but is screaming and yelling and
That's violence.
throwing things. That's violent.
That's
And
violence.
what
I
those
I
kids,
can feel it like right here, actually, when you're talking about it. Yeah. It's real.
you can call the police.
Yeah.
And that will be less traumatic than letting them, see it over and over again.
It's scary, though, I think, for people to call the police, especially in the milieu that you work in.
Yeah.
The idea of having a police car show up in your driveway,
Yep.
and then
The neighbor
potentially,
saw and everybody else saw.
yeah, it's a scary move to make
I totally get it.
with potential repercussions from the perpetrator.
Yep.
Right? It can be considered a bold move.
It absolutely can. And look, I'm not going to tell you there are not times where the police are like, I don't see any marks.
Yeah.
Go walk it off, sir. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
I'm not telling you that
Yeah,
that
yeah,
doesn't
yeah,
happen.
yeah.
But like in situations where things are like if somebody has brandished, and again, I feel like,
Yeah.
I have that case now. And it was the wife who brandished the knife
Yeah.
against the husband because she is a malevolent narcissist. But the point being is that, and she did in front of the kid.
Mm.
That kind of thing is, scary, and that is sometimes that's when
That's when you need police.
to be
You need
involved. But,
protection. Yep.
or you can go to a lawyer and help
Yep.
draft the petition and get the order of protection, or you can get
Yep.
something called, if you have to start the divorce action, but you can do something what's called exclusive occupancy.
Oh.
You can get an order that provides you with occupancy of your home and ousts the perpetrator
Oh, wow.
on
Okay.
a temporary basis until things are, resolved in the sense of like dealing with money and custody and some other stuff like that.
Mhm.
But in certain real scary situations, that can also be obtained through the involvement of court. But all these things obviously take the bravery of somebody to be able to say no mas, right?
Yes. Yes.
And never, no matter what socioeconomic, world you live in or what your education is, that's you could literally, and I know people, right, who are mental health professionals
Yeah.
or who help people in whatever they do in their life, and they are super educated, but when it comes to their life, right, this
Yeah.
is it is a big step.
It's a big step, and
Absolutely.
I'll tell you, I we were talking before about being able to come in for a consultation, and it doesn't have to be
That you didn't
the
make your
final
decision.
move. You
Yep.
make your decision when you make your decision. I remember, a number of years actually before I ended up getting a divorce, there was a little fidelity issue that popped up, which was a surprise to me. And I remember talking to a friend of mine who had gotten a divorce. My kids they were tiny at the time.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God. My friend said to me, you know what, Kath, you will know when it's the right time.
Right.
Don't just like if you're not ready, you're not ready. You will know when the time is right.
Right.
I just sat with that. And actually I was like, okay. And I heard it because I didn't know what to do.
Right.
I was like, what do I do here? Obviously that was not the time. When it was time, I did know.
Yep.
Hands down, 100%, not even a question. I knew, that was like,
Yep.
so there's something reassuring about that to know that you're getting into a headspace of questioning something
Yeah.
because things aren't feeling right or things literally are not right. You'll make the move when and if you decide to,
Yeah.
when and if you're ready to.
Or
right?
sometimes, look, the decision's made for you, right?
Right.
You know,
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
and you don't have a choice. But
Nope.
no matter what, it's one thing that people, often ask is like, is it better to be the plaintiff or the defendant kind of thing? Is it better for you to be the one who files first? It
Right.
doesn't matter.
There's no such thing as a good, that was a question I was going to ask you. Is there a good way to divorce? Is there such a thing? Like, what's the good divorce?
Okay. So, we say if both parties walked away unhappy, in the sense of like, that of what the resolution was, that's a good divorce because neither one thought they got one over on the other. So to speak. But a good divorce, right? If I had the perfect recipe of a good divorce was that parties kept the emotion out of it. They resolved things in a reasonable way that was fair and followed the rules of, appropriateness in the sense of what's fair. And if you've been, and you're splitting up the assets and you're dealing with support in an appropriate way, that's not just the formula, but it makes sense for the lifestyle and gives the non-moneyed spouse, the runway and gives the kids the opportunity to transition whatever the next transitions are. And everybody did it without any desire to hurt the other party, right? And they did it in a reasonable fashion, I guess. And you had two lawyers that worked it out, or you had a mediator that helped you guys make a decision that worked for you.
Yeah.
I'm going to be like, well, I want to do it. This is what the law provides, right? But if, it's really important for both parties that the kids stay in the marital residence until the youngest goes to college, and the husband's going to make sure that support is going to be given to ensure that we can do that. And maybe you didn't take that asset or you didn't take the full 50%. I'm good at to craft anything that's creative. I just want to make sure it's fair.
Right.
But I guess a good divorce is one that everybody came to the table with the idea of not trying to screw the other party.
Yeah. Yep.
But look, not putting I get very excited if they didn't put the kids in the middle.
Yeah.
That's a good divorce to me. Right?
Yeah. Yep.
If it was just about money and we fought about it and it all resolved and you didn't spend millions of dollars to divide $4 million of assets, right? That's a good divorce.
Yeah.
For me, and because I work in such a contentious world.
Yeah.
You know what? When I just have an adversary on the other side that I'm not throwing up that they called me, that I can pick up the phone and I'm like, and they're rational and they're reasonable and they have an ability to get through to their client.
Yeah.
I think that's a great divorce.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's good. That's great to know. No, those are really helpful things for all of our gals here to keep in mind.
Yeah.
So then with all of this that we have discussed, and
Right.
there's a lot of it, what are the 3 things that you suggest people take away with them?
Okay, so first one, knowledge is power.
Yep.
So understand, try to get information as best as you can,
Mhm.
even before you go to the divorce lawyer, right? Go through your house and see if you can find the tax returns, find bank statements, try to find information so you are armed with it. So when you go see somebody, you have some knowledge. And if you have no access, utilize my suggestion of ask your spouse. God forbid you get
Yeah.
hit by a bus tomorrow. I need to know.
Yeah.
Can we go see the financial advisor together? Whatever it is, I need to understand our finances.
Yep.
I need to really. You complain I shop too much. Can we? I want to understand our finances. Right. So getting information about what there is super important.
Yep.
2, understand your rights. Right. So when you go to see somebody, understand what are we talking about here? Understand, how things will be divided, how things will be valued, what your rights and remedies are, and what your potential be looking at for either maintenance, or we used to call alimony, or child support. And if you work, whether or not you're a maintenance candidate, dependent, right?
Exactly.
All that. 3rd, get your personal board of directors put
Love
together,
that.
right?
Yep.
Find your support network. Take care of yourself and see if you can be in the best position that you can to make good decisions, and to get the right people to, whether it be your financial advisors, your trust and estate lawyers, your therapist, get your team together. I think those are the 3 takeaways I'd want people to walk away with today.
Really, really great and so beautifully articulated, and just makes me feel even more lucky and grateful that I had you in my corner when I was going through all this. And I got lucky, boy. Wow. Thank you for sharing all of this, and thanks for taking the time.
Oh my God. Thank you for having me. And thank you for doing this wonderful podcast and giving these women out there such wonderful resources.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Inside the Wellspace. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.